At Cousin Riley's graduation party, the music was loud, people were laughing, and the smell of barbecue filled the backyard. Madison tried to stay in the corner, sipping her soda and keeping to herself. She didn't feel like she belonged, not when her parents always made her feel small compared to Riley and the others. She was used to being overlooked, but she came because Grandma Eleanor had insisted she show up. Just as Madison thought she could slip away early, Grandma walked over with her bright smile and raised her voice so everyone could hear. "So, how are you liking the house I bought for you?" The whole yard went silent. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and Madison's cup nearly slipped from her hand. She blinked, not sure if she had heard correctly. A house? Bought for her? Her throat tightened, and her mind scrambled for words. "What house?" she finally managed, her voice shaking. Grandma's smile faded into confusion. "The one I gave to your parents for you, sweetheart. Don't tell me you haven't moved in yet." Madison's stomach dropped. She glanced around and saw Riley's parents staring at her, whispers already starting to ripple through the crowd. The air felt heavy, and her face burned as if every pair of eyes was cutting into her. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. A house. She lived in a small, drafty apartment on the edge of town. She worked 2 jobs just to cover rent and bills. Some nights she barely had enough money left for groceries. How could Grandma think she had a house? Her parents stood stiff across the yard, their smiles frozen, their eyes sharp with warning. Richard's jaw tightened. Claudia's hand gripped her wine glass a little too hard. Madison knew that look, one that told her to stay quiet, to not embarrass them. But the whispers grew louder. Someone muttered, "Did she really not know?" Another voice said, "Eleanor bought her a place years ago." Madison's heart thudded in her chest. She looked at Grandma, who still seemed puzzled, and felt a wave of dizziness. She forced a weak smile and muttered, "I think there's some mistake," though every word tasted bitter. Grandma's eyebrows pinched together, her eyes darting between Madison and her parents. The party noise picked up again, but for Madison, nothing felt the same. Her chest felt hollow, her hands trembling as she excused herself and stepped inside the house. Alone in the quiet hallway, she pressed her palms to her face, fighting the rush of panic. What house? What money? And why did she suddenly feel like the entire foundation of her life was built on a lie? Madison stood frozen with a smile that didn't quite reach her face. She nodded quickly and said to her grandmother that maybe she was confused, maybe she mixed her up with someone else. The words came out soft, almost apologetic, as if she needed to calm the air around her. But inside, her chest felt heavy and her thoughts scattered. She hoped the answer would end the questions, yet Grandma Eleanor didn't let it go. Eleanor tilted her head and frowned. "No, darling, I remember it very well. I wrote a check myself. It was for a down payment. I gave it to your parents because I wanted them to take care of the paperwork. That was 3 years ago. Didn't they tell you?" Madison's stomach twisted. Her breath caught, and her lips parted, but no words followed. She remembered that exact year. It was her 21st birthday, the one when her parents sat her down and told her that Grandma had given Riley money for college, but had left nothing for her. Madison never asked why, too embarrassed to push the subject further. She accepted it, believing she wasn't the favorite and that her grandmother didn't think she needed help. She lived with that disappointment quietly, never knowing there was something meant for her all along. Standing there at the party, the truth slipped in like a knife. If Grandma had given money, where had it gone? Why had her parents told her otherwise? Madison felt her throat tighten as she forced herself to nod politely. "I'll talk to them about it later," she whispered, her voice nearly lost under the hum of conversation. Grandma gave her a puzzled look but didn't press further. She turned to greet another guest, leaving Madison standing in a storm of silent questions. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Madison laughed when others laughed, clapped when speeches were made, and even posed for a few photos, but her mind never left those words. Every bite of food felt tasteless, and every second dragged under the weight of suspicion. She avoided her parents' eyes, though she could feel their gaze on her. Her father's face was stern, and her mother's smile looked thin and forced. When the night ended, Madison hugged her grandmother tightly, hiding the trembling in her hand. She drove home in silence, the road lights blurring through her windshield. The tiny apartment greeted her with the same thin walls and drafty windows, reminders of the struggle she carried every day. She dropped her purse on the couch and sank into the cushions, staring at the ceiling. Later that night, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her cousin Lily, Riley's older sister. "Hey, I just wanted to say, I think Grandma really did give your parents money for you. I remember her talking about it when she wrote the check. She was so excited, said it would set you up right." Madison read the words 3 times, her hands shaking harder with each pass. Lily had no reason to lie. That meant Grandma wasn't mistaken at all. The check was real. The money was real. The house was supposed to be real too. Her chest tightened, and for the first time, She let herself whisper the thought out loud into the empty room. They lied to me. The next afternoon, Madison drove to her parents' house with her chest tight and her hands gripping the steering wheel harder than usual. She had barely slept, her mind running through every detail of what Grandma had said and what Lily had confirmed. The only way to get answers was to face them directly. When she walked into the living room, Richard and Claudia were sitting together. They looked up from the television, and Madison didn't bother with small talk. She stood straight, her voice quiet but steady. Grandma told me she gave you money for a house. She said it was for me. For a moment, silence filled the room. Richard's jaw clenched, and Claudia's eyes flickered with unease before she forced a thin smile. Richard leaned forward, his voice sharp. Your grandmother is old, Maddie. She gets confused. Don't take everything she says so seriously. Madison shook her head. She wasn't confused. She remembered every detail. She said she gave you a check 3 years ago. Claudia crossed her arms tightly across her chest. You don't need to stir up drama over something that doesn't exist. You've got a roof over your head already. Isn't that enough? You don't need handouts. The word stung, but Madison pressed on. So you're saying she imagined it? That she just made up giving you money? Richard's face turned red, his voice louder now. You should be grateful we raised you at all. Do you have any idea how much we've sacrificed for you? And now you come here accusing us of stealing. Madison flinched at the volume but held her ground. She thought about every night she spent working late shifts. Every month she barely scraped together rent. Her parents had watched her struggle, and if Grandma's story was true, they had let it happen while keeping her gift for themselves. She stared at them, her chest aching. I'm not accusing. I just want the truth. Did you use the money? Claudia's expression hardened, her lips pressed in a tight line. She didn't answer. Richard leaned back with a bitter laugh. This is exactly why we don't tell you everything. You twist it. You don't appreciate what you have. Madison felt her stomach churn. The anger in their voices, the way they avoided answering directly, it all pointed to one thing. They weren't denying it because it wasn't true. They were trying to bury it under guilt and anger. She realized then that the gift from Grandma hadn't disappeared. It had been taken. Her parents had chosen to lie, to let her scrape by on nothing while they lived in comfort. She swallowed hard and stepped back toward the door. Her voice came out low, heavy with the weight of betrayal. I just wanted you to be honest with me. That's all. They didn't call after her. The sound of the television filled the silence as she walked out, closing the door softly behind her. In the car, she sat gripping the steering wheel, her eyes wet but her face set. She finally understood. The people she had trusted most had built their comfort on us. The following week, Madison decided she couldn't live with just suspicion. Her parents had dodged her questions, but the way they reacted told her she needed proof. She started with a quiet plan. On her lunch break, instead of eating with coworkers, she drove to the county clerk's office. The building was quiet, lined with shelves of old records and computer stations. Her hands trembled as she filled out a request form. When the clerk asked her what she was looking for, Madison explained she wanted property records under her parents' name. The woman typed into the computer, then pointed to a screen. Madison leaned closer, and there it was, a purchase dated 3 years ago. The names Richard and Claudia appeared together, listed as the buyers of a single-family home. Madison's heart raced. Her palms turned damp, and she had to remind herself to breathe. She scanned the details, her eyes landing on the down payment amount. It matched exactly what Grandma had told her. $85,000. The figure glowed on the page like a cruel confirmation. Her throat felt dry. For years, she had believed her parents were struggling just like her. They always claimed money was tight. They told her she needed to be independent, that they couldn't bail her out. She remembered calling her father once when her car broke down on the highway, begging for help with the repair bill. He said he couldn't lend her anything, and that she should figure it out. That same year, they were signing papers for a house bought with the money that should have secured her own future. Madison asked the clerk for a copy of the record. She folded the paper carefully, her fingers shaking as she slipped it into her bag. The evidence felt heavy, more powerful than her words ever could be. She sat in her car afterward, staring at the paper again and again. The street outside bustled with people running errands, but inside her car the world felt still. The betrayal was no longer a possibility. It was a fact. They had taken what was meant for her and built their comfort on it. Madison leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. Her chest tightened as memories surfaced. Her parents acting frustrated when she asked for help, their cold reminders that life is hard. The constant pressure to be grateful even when she had nothing. All of it was poison now. Her parents hadn't just kept a secret. They had let her live in hardship while enjoying something that wasn't theirs to begin with. Madison pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. It was deeper than sadness. It was betrayal, sharp and steady, and it cut through every memory of trust she had left. She folded the record again and placed it in her glove compartment. The truth was hers now, and it couldn't be undone. For the first time, she understood what she was up against. Her parents weren't confused, and they weren't forgetful. They had stolen her future, and they had lied to her face. Madison sat in her car with the property records still fresh in her. At first, she tried to hold herself together, but the weight in her chest grew too heavy. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, and then the tears finally came. They rolled down her face faster than she could wipe them away, leaving her gasping for air. The papers in her glove box weren't just words. They were proof that her parents had chosen their own comfort over her well-being. She thought about the nights she stayed awake worrying about rent, working late shifts just to keep a small roof over her head. She thought about the times she ate noodles for a week because her paycheck had to cover bills first. Meanwhile, her parents slept soundly under the roof that was supposed to be hers. She remembered the day her car broke down on the highway. She was 22, scared and stranded. She called her father, hoping he could lend her a few $100s for the repair. Richard's voice had been cold. "I don't have that kind of money. You'll have to figure it out." She ended up borrowing from a co-worker and took months to pay it back. Now she knew the truth. He could have helped, but he chose not to, because the money was already spent on their comfort. Another memory struck her, when she almost lost her apartment because she was short on rent. She had swallowed her pride and asked her mother for help. Claudia had sighed, saying, "You're an adult now. You need to learn responsibility." Madison had felt ashamed, believing she was a burden. That shame had stayed with her for years. Now it burned with anger. They let her drown while pretending they had nothing to give. Her sobs grew louder in the quiet car, her chest shaking with each breath. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, about love, about the belief that her parents would stand by her when life grew heavy. Instead, they watched her struggle, all while hiding behind lies. She leaned her forehead against the steering wheel, whispering to herself through broken breaths. They knew all along. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than anything she had ever felt. Her parents hadn't just taken a gift. They had stolen her security, her peace of mind, and the belief that she mattered. They let her live with hardship, carrying the weight of survival alone, while they enjoyed a life that wasn't built on their sacrifice but on their dishonesty. Her tears slowed, leaving her drained and hollow. Madison sat in silence, the sound of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and stared out the windshield. The world outside moved as if nothing had happened, cars passing, people walking, the sun shining. But inside, everything had shifted. For the first time, she knew she could never see her parents the same way again. The bond was broken, and nothing would ever make it whole. Sunday came, and Madison drove to her parents' house with a knot in her stomach. The weekly dinners had always been a tradition, but this time the air felt heavier. She knew she carried a truth that none of them wanted spoken. Still, she showed up, sitting quietly at the long table while the family passed dishes around. Grandma Eleanor was cheerful at first, asking Riley about his classes and laughing at Lily's jokes. Then, midway through the meal, her eyes turned to Madison. With the same open smile she always wore, she asked, "Sweetheart, when are you going to invite me over to see your place? I keep waiting for the call." The room went silent. Madison froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. She could feel every eye in the room shift toward her. Richard set his fork down hard against the plate, the sound sharp. "Mother, stop confusing the family with this nonsense." Eleanor frowned, her voice soft but firm. "Nonsense. I gave you money for Madison's house. I've been waiting for her to show me where she lives." Claudia cleared her throat and forced a smile at the others. "Mom, you must be mixing things up. Madison's apartment is small. That's why she hasn't invited you. She's embarrassed. Isn't that right, Maddie?" All eyes turned to Madison again. Her hands tightened around the fork until her knuckles turned pale. She wanted to slam the truth down on the table, wanted to show them all the papers she had tucked away at home. But the words caught in her throat. If she said it here, in front of everyone, it would explode into chaos. She forced herself to nod slightly, though her chest burned with anger. "Maybe another time, Grandma," she murmured, her voice low. Eleanor looked hurt, her brow creasing, but she let it go and moved on to another subject. Still, Madison felt the weight of her parents' eyes on her. Richard's glare was cold, Claudia's smile was stretched too thin. They thought they had silenced her, kept the lie tucked away under the tablecloth. But inside, Madison's anger boiled. She could barely taste the food. Every laugh from Riley, every casual comment from Lily, felt distant. The only thing she heard was her father's voice snapping at Eleanor, telling her to stop. The only thing she felt was the heat in her chest, the knowledge that she had proof, and that their control was slipping. She sat quietly for the rest of the meal, listening but not speaking. Her parents might have won this round, silencing her in front of the family, but Madison knew the truth was already out there, cracking through their lies. Grandma would not forget her own words, and Madison no longer intended to stay silent forever. When dinner ended, she hugged Grandma tightly before leaving, whispering a quick goodbye. As she walked to her car, her fists clenched at her sides. She wasn't ready to fight in that dining room, but the fight was coming. She could feel it. A few days after that uneasy dinner, Madison called her grandmother and asked if they could meet for coffee. Eleanor sounded pleased on the phone, unaware of the storm brewing beneath Madison's calm voice. They met at a quiet cafe in town, one Eleanor often visited with her friends. Madison arrived early, her heart pounding as she waited. When her grandmother walked in with her warm smile, Madison almost lost her courage, but she reminded herself why she was there. They sat at a small corner table. After some light talk about Riley's graduation and the weather, Madison took a deep breath. "Grandma," she said gently, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Eleanor tilted her head, her expression soft. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" Madison's voice trembled. "Did you really give Mom and Dad money for me to buy a house?" The older woman's face shifted from confusion to certainty. She reached across the table and touched Madison's hand. "Yes, I did. It was $85,000. I wanted you to have a safe start, a home of your own. I gave it to your parents because I thought it would be easier for them to handle the details. Haven't you moved in yet?" The words hit Madison like a punch to the chest. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "Grandma, I never saw a single dollar. I didn't even know about it until you mentioned it at the party. They told me you never gave me anything." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes shimmered with shock and sorrow. No, that can't be true. They promised me they would take care of everything. I trusted them." Madison swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "I've been working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. I've struggled to pay rent, to fix my car, to keep food on the table. All that time, they had what you gave me." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, and she shook her head slowly, as though trying to undo the reality. "I gave it with love, Madison. I thought I was helping you. I never imagined," her voice cracked, and she dabbed her eyes with a napkin. "I feel so foolish. They've betrayed you, and they've betrayed me." Madison reached across the table and held her grandmother's hand tightly. "This isn't your fault. You trusted them. I did too. But I can't let this go. They stole from both of us, and I won't stay quiet anymore." Eleanor nodded, though her face showed deep hurt. "You're right. They took what was meant for you. That money was supposed to give you security, not be hidden away for themselves. I should have made sure you got it directly." For the first time, Madison felt strength rising through her pain. The betrayal still cut deep, but now she wasn't alone. Her grandmother's shock and sorrow proved she wasn't imagining. The truth was clear. Her parents had lied, and both of them had paid the price. She squeezed Eleanor's hand one last time and whispered, "I promise you, Grandma, I won't let this slide. They won't get away with it." Madison waited a few days before she returned to her parents' house. This time she wasn't going in with questions. She carried the property record in her bag, along with the memory of her grandmother's broken voice. When she stepped through the door, Richard and Claudia were in the kitchen. They looked surprised to see her, but Madison stood tall, refusing to shrink back. "I know the truth," she said firmly. "Grandma confirmed everything. She gave you $85,000 for me, and I found the house in your names at the county clerk's office. You stole what was meant for me." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Richard's face turned red almost instantly. "You ungrateful girl," he snapped, slamming his hand against the counter. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Accusing us of theft." Claudia crossed her arms and glared. "Your grandmother is confused, and you don't know what you're talking about. Stop digging into things you don't understand. We've given you more than enough already." Madison's chest burned. She pulled the folded paper from her bag and laid it on the table. "This says otherwise. The down payment matches what Grandma told me. Don't lie to me anymore." Richard's voice rose to a shout. "You think you can come in here and talk to us like that? You should be thankful we even raised you. Do you think life was easy for us? We sacrificed, and this is how you treat us." Claudia stepped closer, her voice cold and sharp. "If you keep pushing this, don't expect us to help you with anything again. You'll be cut off completely." Madison's hands shook, but her voice cut through their threats. "You already cut me off years ago when you stole from me." The words burst out of her like fire, her eyes wet but fierce. The room went silent for a moment, her parents staring at her with a mix of shock and rage. Madison reached into her pocket and pressed record on her phone, keeping it low by her side. If they denied it later, she wanted their words saved. Richard pointed at her, his voice dripping with anger. "You're nothing but selfish. You'll never survive without us." Claudia hissed. "You've embarrassed this family enough. If you think you can take what's ours, you're wrong." Their fury only confirmed what Madison already knew. She let them shout, recording every word, every slip of their temper. Her chest pounded, but she felt stronger than before. She had the documents, she had her grandmother's testimony, and now she had their voices exposing themselves. When their yelling slowed, Madison lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. You took what wasn't yours, and you'll have to answer for it." She picked up the paper, slid it back into her bag, and walked to the door without waiting for a reply. Behind her, the house echoed with their angry voices, but Madison didn't turn back. For the first time, she felt like the power was shifting. Madison knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. The night after the confrontation, she drove to Grandma Eleanor's house and laid everything on the table: the property record, the recording on her phone, and the weight in her heart. Eleanor listened in silence, her hands trembling as she held the paper. When Madison finished, her grandmother nodded firmly. "We're not letting them get away with this. I'll help you find an attorney." Within a week, they sat together in a lawyer's office. Madison felt nervous, but Eleanor's steady presence gave her strength. The attorney reviewed the documents and listened carefully to the recording of Richard and Claudia's outburst. His expression grew tight, and he shook his head. "This is clear misuse of funds that were gifted for you. We have enough to take legal action." The process wasn't fast, but it was steady. Papers were filed, and soon Richard and Claudia were served with legal notices. Word spread quickly through the family. Cousins who once admired Richard for his confidence and Claudia for her elegance began whispering about the truth. At family gatherings, the tone shifted. Where her parents had once commanded respect, now they were met with cautious stares and hushed conversations. Richard grew angrier as the case unfolded. He called Madison selfish, claimed she was tearing the family apart. Claudia tried to paint herself as the victim, saying they only used the money because they needed it more. But the facts didn't bend to their excuses. The house had been bought in their names, with the exact sum Eleanor had entrusted to them for Madison. Their own words, caught on Madison's recording, made their guilt undeniable. The attorney pushed forward, and soon the consequences grew heavier. To avoid harsher penalties, Richard and Claudia were forced to sell the house. Watching them pack up and leave the place they had built on lies was not something Madison celebrated, but it gave her a sense of justice. They lost the home, and with it, the image they had worked so hard to maintain. Friends who once gathered at their parties drifted away. Neighbors whispered. Their credibility crumbled, not because Madison shouted about it, but because the truth stood clear for everyone to see. The proud faces her parents wore began to fade, replaced by bitterness and isolation. Through it all, Madison stayed quiet and steady. She didn't brag and she didn't gloat. She showed up at court, spoke honestly when asked, and let the evidence speak for itself. When people tried to ask her about the case, she only said, "I just wanted what was mine." Her parents tried one last time to guilt her, sending messages filled with anger and pleas. Madison didn't answer. She had spent years carrying the weight of their lies. Now she carried only her freedom. By the time the case ended, Madison stood taller. She had faced betrayal, uncovered the truth, and refused to back down. With Eleanor by her side, she made it clear she would never again be manipulated or silenced. Months later, life felt different for Madison. The long legal fight had finally ended, and with Grandma Eleanor's steady support, she was able to buy a small home. It wasn't big, and it didn't have fancy things, but when Madison turned the key for the first time, it felt like freedom. Every corner of the house carried a sense of peace because it was hers, something no one could ever take away again. Unpacking boxes in her own living room, Madison thought about the path that had brought her here. The betrayal had never been only about the money. What cut deepest was realizing her parents had looked her in the eyes all those years while letting her struggle, knowing they were living comfortably in a house that was meant to give her a fair start. They hadn't just stolen money, they had stolen trust, safety, and moments that could have made her life easier. That wound ran deeper than any check or deed ever could. But as Madison looked around at her modest space, she realized she had taken something back, too. She had taken her voice, her strength, and her future. Her revenge was not loud or messy. She didn't waste her energy screaming or trying to humiliate her parents. Instead, she stood tall, uncovered the truth, and fought for herself. In the end, that was more powerful than any harsh words she could have thrown at them. Her parents no longer had a place in her life. The phone calls stopped, the messages stopped, and the silence grew heavy. But it wasn't painful the way Madison once feared. It felt like breathing clean air after being trapped in a smoky room for years. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for their approval or fearing their disappointment. She was free. Grandma Eleanor came by often, sometimes with cookies, sometimes with just her company. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun fade. Madison loved those quiet moments, hearing her grandmother's gentle laugh, feeling the bond between them grow stronger. Eleanor often reminded her how proud she was, not just for standing up for herself, but for refusing to let bitterness harden her heart. Madison knew there would always be a scar from what her parents did. Some days she still wondered how different her life might have been if they had simply honored Grandma's, but she also knew dwelling on that question wouldn't change the past. What mattered was the choice she made now, to live with dignity, to protect her peace, and to build a future without the weight of their betrayal. When Madison locked the door at night, she felt secure. When she woke up in the mornings, sunlight filling her little home, she felt hope. She no longer defined herself by what her parents had taken. Instead, she defined herself by what she had reclaimed, her independence, her worth, and her voice. It wasn't the house itself that mattered most. It was the lesson she carried with her. No one, not even family, could take away her future unless she let them. And Madison had chosen, finally, not to let them.